The first sound was barely audible, a soft scrape like a rat behind the drywall. Annie paused, toothbrush in hand, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. She tilted her head toward the bathroom mirror. There it was again. Scrape. Tap. Pause. She swallowed hard and spat into the sink. "Mom?" she called, voice shaky. No answer. The house was quiet, too quiet for a Friday evening. Her younger sister Jessica was at her friend's house. Her mother was supposed to be back from her shift by now. Annie wiped her mouth and stood still, waiting. Tap. Tap. This time it came from behind the mirror. Annie Andrews had grown used to silence. Since her dad died, the house carried it like a second skin. She and Jessica had filled it as best they could, with music, laughter, midnight snacks. But some silences aren't meant to be broken. Still, the last few weeks had been different. Objects were moving. Doors, once closed, were found slightly open. Furniture was subtly rearranged. And that scent, sweat and dirt and something sour, clung to the air like breath on glass. She'd thought she was imagining things, until the night she and Jessica heard knocking from the walls. At first, they thought it was their dad. Not rationally, not really. But grief does strange things. It tells you the impossible is comforting. The knocks came in patterns, 3 at a time, always at night. Jessica had brought out a Ouija board from the attic. They held hands and asked questions. "Are you there, Dad? Do you miss us?" The planchette moved, slow, deliberate. It spelled yes. They both cried. They both believed. But that was before the board spelled, "I'm watching you." Annie pushed the mirror gently. It creaked on its hinge, just a wall cabinet, nothing fancy. But something wasn't right. She leaned in. A cold draft hit her cheek. The mirror moved again, on its own. She stepped back. Heart pounding, she flung the door wide open and screamed. Inside, where toothpaste should have been, sat a photograph of her father, one she hadn't seen since the funeral. It was burned around the edges. Behind the cabinet, tucked into the shadows, something moved. She ran. Down the hall, bare feet slapping against hardwood. "Mom!" she screamed again, louder. Still nothing. She grabbed the phone, hands shaking, dialed 911. Ring. Ring. Then click. The line went dead. In the basement, under a rotting pile of insulation, a pair of eyes opened. He had been listening the whole time. Daniel LaPlante licked his dry lips and smiled. Weeks earlier, they had met him by accident. A phone call, wrong number. But the voice on the other end was charming, polite. He said his name was Danny. He claimed to know someone from their school. Annie had talked for an hour. Then another day. Then another. He was kind, soft-spoken, said all the right things. When he asked to meet her in person, she said yes. The boy who showed up wasn't the boy from the phone. He was thinner, greasier, clothes unwashed, teeth yellow. But Annie was polite. She let him in. They talked for 15 minutes before she made an excuse and walked him out. That should have been it. But Daniel had already picked his target. He knew where she lived. He had watched her for weeks. And now, he knew the layout of the house. He came back 2 nights later. Not through the door. Through the basement. Annie didn't know he was living inside her walls. Didn't know he had carved crawl spaces behind the closets. Didn't know he had cut a small hole in her bedroom wall, hidden behind a poster, just big enough to watch her sleep. That night, after the mirror, she didn't sleep. Neither did Daniel. He crawled through the walls like a spider, silent and patient. In his mind, they were already connected, already in love. He just needed her to believe it. In the morning, Annie found her dresser drawers open. Her clothes folded, but in the wrong order. The toothpaste cap was missing. Again, on her pillow, a single dead rose. Jessica didn't believe her at first. "Maybe we're just stressed," she whispered. "It's the anniversary." Annie nodded, but she didn't believe it. Not anymore. That night, she slept with a knife under her pillow. Daniel watched from the vent above the closet. Breath slow, eyes wide. Soon, he thought. Soon. The police didn't believe her. They took the report, sure. Wrote it down. Promised to look into it. But the officer's expression was all too familiar, that quiet, polite doubt reserved for teenage girls and grief-stricken families. "There's no sign of forced entry," he said, almost gently. "Maybe a prank. Maybe your imagination." Annie wanted to scream. Instead, she nodded and kept the knife under her pillow. That night, the knocking came again. Not from the walls this time. From inside her closet. 3 slow taps. Then a whisper. "Annie." She froze. Her breath caught mid-exhale. The voice came again. Louder. "Annie, don't be scared." She bolted upright, heart pounding. There was no one in the room. She stood, trembling, and crept to the closet door. It was shut, but the floorboards creaked behind it. She flung it open. Nothing. Just clothes. Shoes. Dust. Then she saw it. A small hole, carved behind the far wall of the closet. Too small for a full-grown man, but just big enough. She screamed. Her mother burst into the room, frantic. Annie pointed, shaking. "Someone's been in here." Behind the wall. Her mother dropped to her knees and stared into the crawlspace. Her hands trembled. She called the police again. This time, they came fast. They searched the house for hours. Then one officer opened a hidden panel in the basement. Behind a false wall of sheetrock and insulation, they found a tiny, makeshift nest. Soiled blankets, rotten food, empty soda cans, and beside them, a journal. Pages and pages written in a jagged, obsessive scrawl. Most of it was about Annie. She smells like cinnamon when she sleeps. Her mother leaves the house at 7:13 a.m. Jessica listens to music too loud. "I hate it. One day, she'll see me. Really see me." They arrested Daniel LaPlante 2 days later. He was found hiding in a cupboard, clutching a kitchen knife. His face was filthy, eyes wild. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just smiled. At the station, he finally broke his silence. "She invited me in," he whispered. "We were going to be a family." The headlines were immediate. "Boy lives inside walls of teen girl's home. Real-life house of horrors." The story spread like fire. People were terrified, fascinated, but no one more than Annie. Because she knew, deep down, this wasn't over. She started locking her windows, her bedroom, her closet, but she still heard noises. Still woke up gasping from dreams of footsteps above her head. Jessica stopped sleeping in her own room entirely. They stayed in hotels for weeks. The house stood empty, cold, but Daniel's presence lingered like a stain. He was eventually tried and convicted for breaking and entering, armed assault, and harassment. He was only 17. The court deemed him unstable. He was committed to a youth psychiatric facility. But not forever. Annie tried to move on. She changed schools, dyed her hair, changed her name. But trauma doesn't follow rules. It creeps up when you're brushing your teeth, when you're folding laundry, when a creak in the floorboards makes your stomach drop. 2 years later, Daniel was released. Older, stronger, but his mind hadn't healed, only changed shape. He started watching a new family, a single mother and her 2 children. Their house backed up to the woods. Secluded, quiet. He waited, watched, planned. On December 1st, 1987, he struck again. But this time, there was no hiding, no games. This time, it was pure violence. It started with a knock. Not at the front door. At the back window. The Gustafson family lived on a quiet street in Townsend, Massachusetts. A modest house. A Christmas wreath already up. Nothing about it looked like the kind of place where evil waits. Priscilla Gustafson was a young mother, 33. Kind eyes. Schoolteacher. The kind of woman who left handwritten notes in her kids' lunchboxes. Her husband, Andrew, worked in insurance. That December, he was at the office, finishing paperwork. He would regret that for the rest of his life. Because that knock came while he was gone. Daniel didn't break in. He slipped through the back door. The house was warm, smelled like pine and cinnamon. He found Priscilla in the bedroom. Her daughter Abigail was 5. Her son, William, was 8. What happened next was monstrous. Daniel raped Priscilla. Then he shot her in the head. The children were next. He drowned both. Abigail in the upstairs bathroom, William in the tub. Not quickly, not cleanly. They were found with scratches on the porcelain, as if they'd fought the water with their nails. When Andrew returned home that night, the door was ajar. He stepped inside and called out. Silence. He moved through the house, saw the blood, dropped everything, ran to the neighbors, called the police. He didn't want to see more, but the officers did, and what they found would haunt them forever. Daniel LaPlante had snapped. There were no crawl spaces this time, no whispers, no obsession masquerading as love, only rage. He left behind fingerprints, hair, footprints, all pointing back to the same twisted teenager who once lived in the walls of a grieving girl. This time, there would be no leniency. The police launched a manhunt. They found him hiding in a dumpster, soaked from the rain, clutching 2 handguns. He laughed when they cuffed him, as if he couldn't quite believe how far he'd gotten. At trial, the prosecution was merciless. 3 counts of first-degree murder, rape, burglary. The jury deliberated just 9 hours. Guilty. The judge sentenced him to 3 life sentences without parole. Not that Daniel flinched. He smiled as they led him away. Years later, during an appeal, he claimed he'd found God. He said he was no longer a danger. But his words rang hollow. Because how do you explain a boy who once slept behind the walls of a teenage girl's room, whispering love through drywall, and then slaughtered an entire family? You don't. You just remember. Annie never spoke to the press again. She moved, changed her name, started a family, but she never forgot the feeling of being watched. She still checks closets, still avoids mirrors that tilt forward, still locks her bedroom door. Every night. If this story made you think, share it, because someone else needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real stories that will shake you to your core.